I came in first thing in the morning. I used to come in at 5 o'clock, and one of the circulation people came in and told me to turn on the TV. And we'd heard there was one explosion, and as we were watching, the second plane hit the towers, and we knew something was going on. And it ended up being the first and last extra edition of my career. I was told to get all the reporters in. Some of them brought their kids. We all babysat for each other and figured things out, and I hit Walmart and NMSU, and the other reporters hit several other places, and by early afternoon we had an extra edition on the street with a lot of things that turned out to be kind of premonitions. People forget how many things happened that week, but Elaine Zaley told me about a general who told me that he thought Osama bin Laden was at fault, so we had the scoop right away, even before Bill Clinton started talking about it. So there were a lot of people who had been through terrorist things here, and I ran into a couple of them at MSU, as it turned out. So it was an interesting experience. Steve, do you have anything to add?
It was just a long day in the literal and figurative sense of the word. Derrickson is right. It started out, for me, the day started out, I was asleep. I was at home asleep. And I got woken up by someone in the family telling me that one of the towers had been bombed in New York. I get up and I watch about 30 seconds of it off of TV before Derrickson's phone call comes in, basically saying that all hands are on deck and we're to get into the office. We show up at the office, and within minutes it's pretty much mapped out. Everybody collectively was involved in the process. As Derrickson said, it was true. We gathered our resources, we circled the wagons, and we essentially had an extra edition out within about 90 minutes. It took everybody was that resourceful. Everybody worked that well. There was never any, I don't ever recall any real direction, like Steve, you had to do this, Derrickson, you had to do this, Brooke, you do this. Everybody kind of, we kind of collaborated together. We got our assignments, we went out, we got what we needed, and we put it all together very, very, very quickly. There was a lot of collaboration between the editors, the reporters, everyone involved in picking out photos. Harold Coslin, the late editor, put together the layout and design, he and Charles Brunt. And for me, essentially from there on, I became the lead reporter on 9/11. And my day started that day a little before 7 a.m. And before it was all said and done, quite honestly, the day, quote unquote, day for me ended about midday the following Saturday. Because in between going home maybe to take a nap, take a shower, eat an apple, something like that, I was essentially working pretty much full go around the clock with everything they had me trying to track down. I remember an experience the following day on September the 12th going out to White Sands to do a story about what they were doing and how they were handling and coping with the terrorist attacks. I remember doing my interviews from the main gate at White Sands Missile Range. Wismer personnel were standing behind the gate, and there was actually an armed guard at the gate separating us while I conducted the interview just so we could talk. I can remember instances where I was driving home maybe to take a shower, take a nap, whatever it was, and I had to stop and check and see how gas was going, because there was a rush on gas. There was no stone left unturned. I was able to track down a friend of mine who was living in New York City at the time, and through the grace of God, really, we were able to put together interviews and stuff like that, get something out. But I mean, everybody was involved in it throughout.
Do you remember who it was that actually saw the plane hit the Pentagon? People forget about that, but we had a lost crewman involved in that, I know, and Frank Parrish's niece, who was still a nursing mom at that time, was killed in the towers. And because of the military presence and because everybody was grounded, there were a lot of human interest stories that really did affect us here. And it was a very real presence. I talked to moms and little kids, or moms who would explain to little kids that they could look up and little kids would look up in the sky and wonder if things were going to hit them in their trailer park in the sea or something. It was a very pervasive thing. The whole country felt like it was in it together. And again, because of the military presence here, don't you think there was a lot of real fear that something would be happening here as well?
I think there was just a lot of stress throughout everyone involved, because Derrickson's right, because these were the kinds of tips, the kinds of information that we were sorting out and visiting with, talking to people on the phone, trying to do whatever we could to get things set up. It affected everybody.
For about a year afterwards, my son would ask if the Wells Fargo Tower was going to get hit, the bank tower down there, because that's the biggest town, building in Las Cruces. So, because he saw it. He was watching cartoons that morning, and I made him switch to the news, and he was quite upset. But then he started seeing the footage, and then after a little bit, I got smart and decided to not let him watch anymore. But I was a sports editor at the time, and we worked a lot of late nights then, and I was still asleep when I got a call. I remember getting a call from Felix Chavez, who was a sports writer at the time, and he was telling me that the Twin Towers were hit, the Pentagon was hit. I remember opening my eyes thinking, what's he talking about? I also had received a call saying that Tony Samuel, who was the NMSU football coach at the time, his press conference that day was canceled for obvious reasons. And this was before Felix's call. I was trying to interpret what that meant for obvious reasons. And then obviously I soon found out. And that was Aggie Lobo week. NMSU was going up to UNM that Saturday to play, and that game was ultimately postponed until the last game of the season. And so we came in, and from a sports standpoint, we just sort of trying to collect, will games be played this week? What's happening today? We put some wire stories on the newspaper about how all the games, baseball games and everything scheduled for that day were canceled. And then we jumped in helping out with the news and stuff. I remember writing a story about clergy and what were clergy doing that day, and were they gathering people together? Were they going to help comfort people? And talking to some clergy members who were out of town, who were rushing back to Las Cruces and that sort of stuff. And also wrote a story about travel agents and how their lives changed that week, and how crazy things got because all the flights were grounded, and now they had to just work like crazy to try to help their customers, and people were stranded all over the place, all over the world. So it was a very interesting. There were a lot of angles to that, and that makes sense. But a lot of times we forget how many different people were touched in different ways. We think about the victims and their immediate families and how horrible that was. But it reached out and touched everybody pretty much around the world for a week or two at least.
Because of the backlash, against Muslims too, we were asked to go and pray with Muslims, and a friend of mine who's British and I actually went over to the local center and talked to them there. And on a personal note, we lost a dear friend that time too. Harold Cosland, who was quite ill with dialysis, died during that period. He went down with his boots on watching CNN and having written an editorial at the end of the week about it. So that was a tough time for all of us, and we actually had a grief counselor come in and talk to us because we as reporters had heard so many tales of grief when we lost our editor and best friend that week. So I think for all of us it has kind of a punch beyond what you usually have outside probably the areas in which it hit.
It was an interesting, in many ways, rewarding experience professionally as a journalist. But personally, when you threw in things like Harold's death and the concerns, the true genuine concerns, the feelings that people had, it was hard. It was hard on us too. It was hard on everybody. How we got through that, still to this day, I try not to think about it too much, because if I did, I think I might have problems sleeping at night, just trying to recall all of that. But I know it was a very, very hectic, very, very, very stressful time for everyone.
There was a sense of everybody pulling together, though. I know one of the little side notes I did, in addition to the runs on gas, was that a lot of the grocery stores were bereft of comfort food. The ice cream sections and the fast food things and everything, everybody was under a lot of stress. Of course, we ate healthy here in the newsroom because we're that kind of people. But it was an interesting time, and I think there's no time in my professional career that I've ever put out an extra in that short a time, or an extra at all. And I've been in this business a long, long time, and it's probably true of you guys too. Do you ever remember putting out an extra?
Well, not like that, not a daily. breaking news extra type of thing.
Well, see, and that's the thing in the profession. Maybe the last extra in our lifetimes that had come out before that was very probably when Kennedy got shot in Dallas. You know, you had newspapers come out that day and do that. Keep in mind that at that time specifically, the Sun-News was then, when Kennedy died, was an afternoon newspaper. So they were able to put that together fairly quickly, right on their deadlines. But us, we were a morning paper, you know, during the time of 9/11. And to come in and work that fast is a credit to the colleagues, to the people that I worked with, because I fed off of that energy. I really did. And that's all I had to go on for a couple of days. But it paid off. It made me better.
And I just remember too, I flew for the first time 9 days later, which happened to be the day Harold passed away that we found out. I didn't know about it until I landed, but went through Dallas, went through Kansas City, drove to Manhattan, Kansas, because the Aggies were playing Kansas State. And just the presence of the military in the airports, the National Guard and everything, it felt like something out of a movie. All these, you know, machine guns and rifles and people marching back and forth in the airports. It was a really, really weird feeling. And I just remember all day I had this strange feeling. And I attributed it to, you know, flying for the first time after 9/11 so soon thereafter, and, you know, how the airports looked different and everything. And then, of course, I got to Manhattan, and I was told when I called in that Harold had passed away too, our longtime editor. So it was just, like you said, it was surreal. So it was surreal in many ways. But we got through it, and it was very definitely, like you said, a learning experience. And even for some of us who'd been in the business for a while, and some of us who hadn't.
See, because from a personal standpoint, Lou, it was that I had the job of reporting the best I could, the best of my abilities, with the resources and the help that I had, 9/11, and the enormity of that event. But couple that with the fact that the day of Harold's passing, I had to write his obituary. And I say even to this day that still remains the hardest story I've ever had to write, because I remember finishing it and I had to get up and leave right there. I couldn't stay. It's the first time I ever had to get up from my job and walk away from it, just because it was that emotional. It really was. It was that hard. So to take all of that, those 2 weeks of events, and put it together into some kind of context, it still hurts. Physically, it still hurts.
And, you know, some people watching this might not remember Harold Goslin or anything, but he'd been a long time editor here.
The founder of the Deming Duck Race, so he was a man of great range.
So that's why
a sense of humor then, and we didn't have it. But
yeah, he wasn't in the greatest of health, but, you know, losing him was not expected either. And for it to happen right within, you know, less than 2 weeks of 9/11, when things were still going on. And I remember being at the office that night, the night before he passed away, and the night before I flew out. He was here watching President Bush taking notes to, you know, write about something, and President Bush was speaking on TV that night, and he was writing notes for either an editorial or something. And then he felt, you know,
he was so beloved that there were about 3 memorials for him: a funeral in Deming, and burial, and one here at Court Youth Center, and a gathering of reporters. So our grieving went on for quite a while, but we all lived through it, and here we are yet again. And I'm glad that we aren't going to war with Syria today. We've done enough for the time being.
All right. Well, I think we have a lot of good content here. Are there any other final words any of you would like to say?
I just remember, and I hate to speak in cliches or anything, but how you saw the images all across the country, and it was here too in Cruces. You saw flags everywhere, and people having flags on their cars, and it was nice to have that unity, even though it came out of something horrible, and even though it didn't last long necessarily either. It was really nice to see, and that was another thing we reported on. I remember even, you know, talking to stores that sold flags, and were they running out of flags? And
oh, it did last a long time. I remember
Yeah.
red, white, and blue Christmas trees that year, and there was quite an outpouring of patriotism.
Yeah.